The sky turned black without warning, heavy clouds rolling in like an army. Winds howled across the land, tearing branches from trees and lifting dust into the air. The human, a lone traveler walking the river path, looked up as lightning ripped across the heavens. Thunder followed, loud enough to shake the ground under his feet. He had heard stories of sudden floods in this land, but he never thought he would see one himself. The river beside him began to swell, water rising higher and higher as if the earth itself had opened its veins. Rain poured down in sheets, soaking his clothes and blinding his eyes. In seconds, the calm river turned into a roaring beast, waves slamming against the banks. The human tried to run, but the flood came faster than any step he could take. Water surged forward, smashing into the ground and pulling everything into its grip. Trees, stones, and whole pieces of houses were dragged along like toys. The traveler was swept off his feet, thrown into the raging water. He fought to breathe, gasping as waves crashed over his head. The current spun him around, pulling him under, lifting him again, then pushing him toward sharp rocks. His arms reached for anything solid, and finally his hand caught a floating beam of wood. Clinging tight, he tried to lift his head, sucking in air whenever he could. Then he saw her. At first he thought it was just more debris, a small figure caught in the current, but as lightning split the sky again, he saw clearly. It was a girl. An alien girl struggling to keep her head above the water. Her skin glowed faintly under the stormlight, her eyes wide with fear, her small hands thrashing helplessly. For a moment the human hesitated, his own life already hanging by a thread. But something inside him pushed harder than fear. He let go of half his grip on the beam and kicked toward her. The current tried to pull them both apart, but he kept moving, each stroke costing him more strength. The alien girl's head dipped under, swallowed by the angry waves. The human dived after her, lungs burning, arms cutting through the water. His hand brushed against her arm, slipping once, then catching hold. He pulled her close, kicking upward with all his might, until they both broke the surface, gasping for air. The girl clung to him, coughing, her voice too weak to form words. She was light, almost weightless, but the flood made every movement heavy. The human looked around desperately, searching for something that could keep them alive. Through the chaos, he spotted a broken door floating nearby, carried by the rushing water. With his last strength, he dragged both of them onto it, the wood shaking under their weight. The river roared around them, dragging the door downstream like a leaf. The human wrapped one arm around the girl, holding her against his chest so she wouldn't slip away. Her breathing was ragged, but she was alive, her eyes opening slightly to look at him. For a moment, time slowed. The storm screamed, lightning flashed, but in that brief second, two strangers locked eyes. One human, one alien, thrown together by the fury of nature. Neither spoke, but both knew. They only had each other now. The flood carried them farther into the unknown, deeper into darkness. Every wave threatened to tear them apart. Every roar of water promised death. Yet the human held on, his body shaking from cold and exhaustion. And the alien girl, though weak, pressed closer, trusting him completely. Above them, the storm raged without mercy. Below them, the flood swallowed all that once stood on the land. The world they knew was gone, replaced by chaos and endless water. But together, on that fragile piece of wood, their story had just begun. The storm finally began to fade, but the night it left behind was no kinder. Dark clouds swallowed the moon, and only faint flashes of distant lightning showed the endless water around them. The human lay across the floating door, his arms locked around the alien girl. Her small frame was shivering against him, her breath uneven, her skin ice cold. He whispered to her, though he knew she might not understand. "Hold on, don't let go." His voice was hoarse, carried away by the wind. The girl stirred, weakly moving her head, her strange glowing eyes half open. She didn't answer in words, but her trembling fingers clutched tighter at his chest. The water was calmer now, but the current was strong, pulling them into the black unknown. The human lifted his head, searching for land, but all he could see was darkness stretching forever. Every sound was heavy, the splash of drifting wood, the hiss of the dying storm, the groan of water dragging ruins down, and beneath it all, A deeper sound, the growl of something moving under the flood. He forced himself to stay awake, though his body begged for rest. The alien girl was too fragile. If he closed his eyes for long, she might slip into the water and vanish. So he tightened his grip, resting his chin against her damp hair. She was strange, different from him, yet in this moment she was all that mattered. Suddenly, the door jolted. Something struck it from below, a heavy thud that almost flipped them over. The human's heart pounded, his eyes darting across the water. Another hit followed, and then a shape surfaced, sharp fins slicing the waves, circling closer. Predators, drawn by the storm's chaos. The alien girl whimpered, hiding her face against him. The human gritted his teeth, kicking the water to push the floating door away. But the dark shape followed, its fin breaking the surface, circling tighter and tighter. The human searched desperately, and there, a broken oar drifted close. With one hand he grabbed it, with the other he held the girl close. The fin came straight for them, water splitting as the beast lunged. The human swung hard, the oar crashing down with a crack. The creature hissed, slipping back into the water. But it didn't leave. It circled again, faster this time. The human's muscles screamed, his arms trembling, his breath harsh. Still, he raised the oar, ready to strike again. The alien girl surprised him then. Her glowing eyes widened, and from her hand a faint shimmer of light spread over the wood. It was weak, barely enough to push back the shadows, but the creature flinched as if burned. The human looked at her in shock, but she only gasped. "Stay. Close," before her head dropped again. Whatever energy she had used left her weaker, her small body limp in his arms. But the strange light lingered, faint and soft, wrapping around them like a shield. The creature hissed once more, then vanished beneath the waves. The human exhaled in relief, clutching the girl tighter, whispering thanks she couldn't hear. Hours passed as the current carried them farther. The human's strength faded, his eyelids heavy, but he refused to let go. Every time he drifted near sleep, he would jolt himself awake, checking that she was still breathing. And every time her chest rose weakly against his, giving him reason to fight longer. At last, the blackness broke. A faint outline of trees appeared in the distance, half drowned but real. The current dragged them toward it, faster and faster. The human used the oar to steer, guiding their broken raft toward the edge of survival. When the door scraped against the branches of a half-fallen tree, he didn't wait. With all his strength, he dragged the girl onto the branches, pulling her above the water. She lay weak and silent, her skin pale bone. But her pulse still alive. The human collapsed beside her, chest heaving, body shaking with exhaustion. They were no longer drifting in endless darkness. They had found a place to rest, a place to breathe. The flood had not killed them yet, but the night was far from over, and danger still waited beyond the shadows. The storm had passed, but the night left behind a cruel silence. The human sat on the half-fallen tree, holding the alien girl close. The flood still surrounded them, but the water was calmer now, broken by floating debris. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, his body shaking not only from exhaustion, but from the bitter cold. Rain still dripped from the branches above, soaking them again and again. Every breath he took turned into mist, proof of the freezing air. He looked down at the alien girl. Her lips were turning pale, her body trembling violently. If she stayed like this, if her soaked clothes kept stealing away her heat, she would not survive the night. The human clenched his jaw, torn by the thought. He knew what had to be done, but shame made him hesitate. Stripping away clothes meant exposing both of them, two strangers, one human and one alien. But survival demanded it. Wet clothes were death. Dry skin pressed together was life. He whispered to her softly, though he wasn't sure she understood. "You'll die if we stay like this. Forgive me." With shaking hands, he began to remove his own soaked shirt, the fabric heavy and cold against his skin. Then carefully, he reached for her sleeve, his fingers trembling as much from nerves as from the cold. The alien girl stirred weakly, Her glowing eyes half open, she gasped faintly, her voice broken but filled with fear. "No, don't," she whispered, her arms trying to cover herself. The human paused, his heart aching at her reaction. "I'm not hurting you," he said quickly, his voice urgent and desperate. "It's the cold. If we don't do this, you'll die." For a moment she stared at him, her small chest rising and falling rapidly. Finally, with a faint nod, her arms lowered, though shame burned. In her expression, he worked carefully, removing her soaked tunic and laying it aside. Her skin shimmered faintly under the dim light, strange yet fragile, as if carved from glass. He quickly looked away, keeping his mind fixed on survival, not her beauty. Then he pulled off his own trousers, leaving only the bare minimum between them and death. Together they were vulnerable, stripped not by choice, but by the cruelty of nature. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close against his chest. Her body was so small, so fragile, he feared she might break. But slowly, pressed against his warmth, her shivering began to ease. The human closed his eyes, focusing on the sound of her breathing. Every shallow inhale was a victory, every faint exhale, a promise she was still alive. The alien girl clung to him, her fingers weak but unwilling to let go. Her head rested against his shoulder, and in her silence he heard trust growing between them. The night dragged on endlessly, broken only by the groan of water and the calls of distant creatures. The human forced himself to stay awake, though exhaustion pressed on his eyelids. Each time he began to drift, the thought of her freezing in his arms jolted him back. She depended on him, and he refused to fail. At one point she whispered something in her own tongue, a soft string of words carried by the wind. He didn't understand, but her voice was tender, almost thankful. When she shifted closer, her cheek against his chest, he realized she wasn't afraid anymore. The shame of undressing had turned into the comfort of survival. Hours passed, and slowly the first signs of dawn appeared. The black sky softened into gray, and the storm clouds began to scatter. The floodwaters still surrounded them, but the light of morning gave them hope. The human looked down at the alien girl, now breathing more evenly, her body warmer and his. "Embrace." He exhaled in relief, whispering softly, "We made it through the night." But deep inside, he knew the trial was only beginning. The storm had stripped them bare, not only of clothes but of barriers between them, and destiny had already begun its silent work, binding them closer than either could understand. The first light of dawn broke across the drowned world. Golden rays touched the water, but the warmth of the sun was weak. The human stirred, still holding the alien girl close, both of them half bare from the long night. Her breathing had steadied, but her body remained cold, her skin pale and fragile. He knew they needed more than the faint sun. They needed fire. But in a world drowned by water, fire was a treasure nearly impossible to find. He looked around, scanning the floating wreckage that the flood had carried. Bits of wood, broken beams, shattered doors, all soaked, all heavy with water. The human tightened his jaw. He couldn't let despair take him. Carefully, he lifted the girl and placed her on the driest branch of the fallen tree. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, glowing faintly as she whispered something too soft to understand. Then she closed them again, trusting him to protect her. He moved quickly, gathering scraps of wood and dry leaves hidden under broken roofs that floated nearby. Some pieces were still damp, but with enough effort he found shards that might burn. He dragged them back, his muscles aching, his skin scraped and bleeding from sharp edges. But pain didn't matter, only her survival did. With trembling hands he searched his pockets, a miracle, a small metal lighter half full. It had been his father's, a memory he never let go. Now it was more than memory, it was life itself. He struck it once, nothing. He struck again, still nothing. On the third strike, a tiny flame danced to life, fragile as a newborn breath. He shielded it with his hands, feeding it the smallest of dry leaves, whispering like it was a sacred prayer. Smoke rose, then fire bloomed. It caught the edge of broken wood, crackling weakly before growing. It's stronger. The human exhaled in relief, pulling the alien girl closer to the flames. Her body twitched at the warmth, her lips parting in a faint sigh. Slowly, color returned to her skin. Her trembling eased. Her small hands lifted toward the fire, fingers stretching to catch its heat. The human watched her with relief flooding his chest. For the first time since the storm began, survival felt possible. As the flames grew, the girl opened her eyes fully. She stared at the fire, her glowing gaze reflecting the flickering light. Then she turned to him, her voice soft but clear. "My name is Lyra," she whispered, her words accented but understandable. The human blinked, surprised she spoke his language. He gave a faint smile despite exhaustion. "I'm Daniel," he said, his voice hoarse. Lyra repeated it softly, as though testing the weight of his name. Her lips trembled, but a small spark of trust showed in her eyes. For a moment, there was peace. Just two souls warming beside fire in a broken world. But peace never lasted long, not in a land swallowed by disaster. From the distance, a sound carried on the wind, the crunch of footsteps on ruined stone. Daniel's body stiffened, his hand instinctively reaching for a piece of wood like a weapon. The fire's glow revealed shadows moving between drowned ruins, at least 3 figures, tall and armed with jagged metal. Their faces were hard, eyes hollow with hunger and desperation. Survivors, but not the kind who shared. Daniel stepped in front of Lyra, shielding her small body with his own. His muscles were still weak, but his stance was firm. He raised the burning branch in his hand, the firelight dancing across his determined face. Lyra's fingers gripped his arm, her glowing eyes wide with fear. The strangers paused, their eyes flicking between the flames and the trembling alien girl. One of them grinned, revealing sharp teeth, and muttered something cruel in a language Daniel didn't know, but the meaning was clear. The fire had made them prey worth hunting, the peace of the ruins was gone, and danger had come again. The fire crackled, small but bright against the drowned ruins. Daniel stood in front of it, his body tense, his hand gripping a burning branch like a weapon. Behind him, Lyra pressed close, her glowing eyes wide with fear, her tiny hands clutching his arm. The shadows of 3 figures grew larger as they stepped into the circle of light. They were survivors, but their faces carried no kindness. Mud covered their skin, scars ran across their arms, and in their hands were jagged pieces of metal torn from ruined machines. Their eyes did not look at Daniel first, they looked at Lyra. The hunger in their stare was worse than any beast of the flood. Daniel's voice was hoarse, but he forced strength into it. "Stay back," he warned, raising the burning branch. The tallest of the strangers sneered, his sharp teeth catching the firelight. "You waste fire on a child," he muttered in broken words Daniel could barely understand. "Give her to us and you live." Lyra gasped, clutching Daniel tighter, her small body shaking. Her whisper was desperate. "Please, don't let them take me." Daniel shifted, moving so that his body shielded her completely. His heart pounded, but his voice was steady. "You'll have to go through me first." The strangers laughed, a cruel sound that echoed through the ruins. One stepped forward, dragging his metal weapon across a stone, sparks flying in the dark. Daniel tightened his grip on the branch, the fire flickering dangerously close to his knuckles. He knew he was weak, his body still frozen from the night, but he refused to back down. The first attacker lunged, swinging his weapon low. Daniel moved fast, slamming the burning branch against the man's arm. The flame licked at his skin, and he screamed, stumbling back into the shadows. The other 2 circled, their movements slow, like predators testing a cornered prey. Lyra's hands glowed faintly again. Against Daniel's back, he felt warmth spreading where she touched him, not fire, but energy. She whispered words in her language, her voice trembling but focused. Suddenly, the fire before them burned brighter, the flames rising higher as if her power fed it. The strangers hesitated, their eyes narrowing at the sudden blaze. Daniel didn't waste the chance. He swung the branch again, sparks flying, forcing the closest man to retreat. The smell of smoke, fire, and fear filled the air. But hunger and desperation made the men bold. One grabbed a stone and hurled it toward Lyra. Daniel turned just in time, the rock striking his shoulder with a sickening crack. Pain exploded through him, but he refused to fall, his arms still guarding the girl. The tallest of the 3 snarled, his patience gone. With a roar he charged, his weapon raised high. Daniel braced himself, But before the strike could land, the flames erupted. The fire burst outward, as if alive, pushing the attacker back with a wave of heat. Lyra's glowing eyes shone brighter now, her hands trembling as she reached toward the fire. Daniel glanced at her in shock, but she shook her head weakly. Not me. The fire listens. The survivors staggered, fear finally breaking through their hunger. One shouted something, and the three of them fled into the shadows, leaving only their echoes behind. Silence returned, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Daniel dropped to his knees, his chest heaving, his shoulder burning with pain. Lyra knelt beside him, her glowing fingers brushing the wound gently. He winced, but her touch eased the ache, warmth spreading through him. She looked into his eyes, voice soft but certain. "They'll come back," she whispered. "Hunters never stop." Daniel nodded, gripping her hand tightly, his gaze fixed on the dark ruins around them. The fire had saved them tonight, but he knew their fight or survival was far from over. The fire still burned in the ruins, but Daniel knew it was no longer safe. The hunters would return, and next time they would not come alone. He looked at Lyra, her glowing eyes dim but determined. They could not stay. They had to move. "Can you walk?" he asked softly, his voice strained from the pain in his shoulder. Lyra nodded weakly, though her legs trembled beneath her. He helped her stand, his arm steadying her fragile frame. Together they stepped away from the warmth of the fire and into the drowned forest. The ground was soft, broken by roots and patches of water. Every step sank into thick mud, dragging at their legs like chains. Daniel gritted his teeth, his body already weak, but he forced himself forward, carrying Lyra whenever she stumbled. The air was heavy, filled with the stench of wet earth and rot. Strange sounds echoed through the forest, croaks, growls, and the hiss of unseen creatures. Daniel's eyes darted through the shadows, ready for danger at every turn. Lyra clung to him, whispering in her language, words he couldn't understand but felt like prayers. Hours passed as they pushed deeper. Mud clung to their bodies, cold water seeped into every wound. The weight of survival pressed heavier than the flood itself, but still, they moved step by step, breath by breath. Then Lyra suddenly stopped, her glowing eyes fixed on something ahead. Daniel followed her gaze and saw a shape half buried in the mud, a small device, metallic, covered in dirt yet pulsing faintly with light. Lyra gasped, rushing forward, her hands shaking as she dug it free. "It's from my people," she whispered, her voice trembling between hope and fear. Daniel frowned, studying the strange object. It was smooth, oval-shaped, its center glowing with shifting colors. "What does it do?" he asked, his voice low. Lyra's fingers traced its surface gently. "It's a guide," she said, softly. "It can show safe paths, but it also calls attention." Her eyes met his, filled with worry. "If I use it, others may find us." Daniel hesitated, torn between fear of pursuit and hope of safety. Behind them, the distant echoes of voices carried through the trees. The hunters were coming back, their shouts growing louder. There was no time for doubt. "Do it," Daniel urged, his tone sharp but protective. Lyra nodded, pressing her hand against the device. The glow spread quickly, casting beams of light through the forest. Symbols appeared in the air, pointing toward a narrow path hidden by vines and mud. "Follow," she whispered, pulling him along. They stumbled through the path, their feet sinking deeper into the muck. The hunters' voices grew closer, angry and relentless. But the glowing marks guided them forward, twisting through the drowned woods. The mud was merciless, sucking at their legs. At one point, Daniel sank almost to his knees. Lyra tugged at his arm desperately, her small frame straining to pull him free. With a roar of effort, he tore himself loose, falling forward into her arms. They both collapsed, gasping, covered in filth, but the device still glowed, urging them onward. Daniel dragged himself up, carrying Lyra despite his exhaustion. The path curved, leading them toward higher ground. Finally, the forest opened into a clearing. Broken stones jutted from the earth, the ruins of something ancient. The device dimmed, its glow fading as if it had finished its duty. Lyra clutched it to her chest, her eyes wide with awe. "This place. It's older than the flood," she whispered. Daniel looked around, his instincts uneasy. The ruins felt alive, the air charged with a strange energy. Behind them, the hunter's shouts echoed faintly, too close for comfort. Daniel pulled Lara close, his voice steady despite his fear. "We rest only for a moment, then. We keep moving." But in his heart he knew, whatever these ruins were, they would not just pass through. Something was waiting, hidden beneath the mud and stone, something that had been waiting for the ruins gave them shelter, but not comfort. Daniel leaned against a broken wall, his chest heaving, his clothes heavy with mud and water. Lyra sat beside him, her small frame curled tightly, clutching the strange glowing device against her chest. For a moment, neither spoke, the silence broken only by the drip of water echoing through the stones. Hunger gnawed at Daniel's stomach like a wild animal. He had not eaten since before the storm, and every muscle in his body screamed for rest. Lyra looked even worse, her lips pale, her body trembling not from cold this time but from weakness. He could see it in her eyes. She was starving. Daniel searched the ruins, his hands sifting through broken stone and rotted wood. He found nothing but wet moss, a few scraps of bark, and the shells of creatures long dead. His heart sank, but he forced a smile when he returned to her. "We'll find something," he said softly, though he did not believe it himself. Lyra's gaze dropped, her fingers tightening around the device. "It can call food," she whispered weakly, "but it takes strength I no longer have." Daniel knelt before her, taking her hands into his. "Then save your strength," he said firmly. "I'll find something the hard way." He left her in the ruins and waded into the drowned forest again. The mud was deeper here, sucking at his boots, pulling with every step. He searched branches, overturned stones, even dug with his bare hands. Finally, he found a cluster of roots, bitter but edible, hidden beneath the soil. When he returned, Lyra's eyes widened. She took the roots with trembling hands, chewing slowly, forcing herself to eat. Daniel watched her carefully, his own stomach twisting in protest. He gave her all he had found, ignoring his own hunger. "Why?" she whispered, staring at him, her glowing eyes reflecting the faint light. "Because you need it more than me," he answered. Weird simply. She stared a moment longer, then lowered her head. Her voice was soft, almost broken. "No one has ever done that for me." Daniel sat beside her again, exhaustion pulling at him. The night air grew colder, pressing them closer together. Without words, Lyra leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. Her small heartbeat thumped faintly against his side, fragile yet steady. He froze for a moment, startled by the closeness. But then he let out a slow breath and wrapped an arm around her. Her warmth, faint though it was, seeped into him, calming the storm inside his chest. For the first time since the flood began, he felt something beyond survival. He felt connection. Lyra's voice was faint, her lips brushing his chest as she spoke. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered, her words carrying both fear and truth. Daniel's heart tightened, the weight of her trust heavier than the flood itself. "You won't," he promised, though he wasn't sure he could keep it. The ruins creaked as the wind passed through broken arches. Shadows moved across the walls, whispering of old times and forgotten lives. Daniel closed his eyes, fighting the pull of sleep. But Lyra's heartbeat against his chest lulled him deeper, each thump reminding him he wasn't alone. He thought of the hunters still searching, of the beasts lurking in the flood. He thought of how fragile this small alien girl was, and yet how strong she had been. She had saved him with fire, with light, with courage he did not expect. And now she leaned on him as if he were the only thing left holding her world together. The hunger in his body still tore at him, but the hunger in his soul, loneliness, emptiness, was eased by her presence. In the ruins of a drowned world surrounded by mud and silence, Daniel realized survival was no longer just about his life, it was about theirs. The ruins around them were only the beginning. As the sun rose higher, Daniel noticed strange carvings etched into the stone walls, symbols that glowed faintly whenever Lyra touched them. It was as if the ruins themselves recognized her. Lyra's glowing eyes widened with every step deeper into the structure. Her hand trembled as she traced the markings. "This is not just ruins," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "This is one of the old temples. My people said they were lost to the flood." Daniel followed her carefully, his senses alert. The air inside the ruins was heavy, thick with damp and silence. Water dripped constantly from cracks above, running down the carvings like silver veins. The ground beneath them sloped downward, leading to a hidden passage submerged in shallow water. Lyra stepped forward first, her small feet splashing quietly. The glowing device in her hands pulsed brighter, guiding their way. Daniel waited beside her, his eyes scanning every corner. He felt as though they were being watched. Though the temple was silent, the passage opened into a vast chamber, half drowned. Pillars rose from the water, broken yet still towering. At the center stood a stone platform, glowing faintly with blue light. Daniel froze, his breath caught in his throat. It looked alive. Lyra gasped, her body shaking with emotion. "This is it," she whispered. "The Temple of the Core." Daniel frowned, confused. "What's the core?" Lyra's gaze lifted to him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. "It is said the core can heal the land," she explained. "When the floods came, the priest tried to seal it away, waiting for the one who could open it again." Her small hand trembled as she pointed to the glowing platform. "And they said it would only respond to two, one of my kind and one of yours." Daniel's heart pounded at her words. Fate, destiny, these were the things he never believed in, but standing here with the strange girl who had appeared in his arms during the flood, he could not ignore the weight of it. Still, he shook his head. "I'm no savior. I'm just a man trying to survive." Lyra stepped closer to him, her voice urgent. "Survival brought you here," she said softly. "The flood chose you. The temple chose you." Her glowing eyes met his, steady and unyielding. "I cannot do this alone, Daniel." Before he could answer, the water rippled violently. Shadows moved beneath the surface, dark and fast. Daniel pulled Lyra behind him, gripping a broken stone like a weapon. The chamber filled with the sound of rushing water, as if something ancient had awakened. A massive shape rose from the depths, a guardian of the temple. Its body was covered in scales that shimmered like glass, its eyes glowing the same blue as the carvings. The creature opened its jaws, releasing a hiss that shook the chamber. Lyra gasped, clutching the device to her chest. "It's testing us," she whispered. Daniel's muscles tensed, his body ready to fight though he knew he was no match. The guardian surged forward, waves crashing around the platform. Daniel stood firm, shielding Lyra with his body. The beast struck, but before it could touch them, the platform beneath their feet glowed brighter. The carvings lit up one by one, until the whole chamber blazed with light. The creature froze, lowering its head as if bowing before them. Daniel stared in disbelief, his chest heaving. Lyra's trembling hand slipped into his, her voice barely a whisper. "It accepts us." The platform shifted, stone grinding as a hidden passage opened. A staircase revealed itself, leading down into glowing darkness. Daniel and Lyra exchanged a look, hearts pounding. The temple had shown them the way, but what waited below could change everything. The staircase descended deep into the earth. Daniel and Lyra moved carefully, their footsteps echoing in the hollow stone. The air grew warmer the further they went, as if the heart of the world was breathing beneath them. At last, the passage opened into a vast chamber filled with glowing light. At the center of the chamber floated a sphere of pure energy. It pulsed slowly, like a living heart, casting ripples of blue light across the walls. Daniel shielded his eyes, the brightness overwhelming. But Lyra stared in awe, tears forming in her glowing eyes. "This is the core," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The priest said it holds the power to reshape the world." Daniel's throat tightened. He had never seen anything so unreal. "What does it want?" he asked softly, his words carried by the hum of energy. Lyra turned to him, her face pale but determined. "It needs us," she explained. "One of my kind, One of yours, united, only then can it release its power. Daniel frowned, his chest heavy with doubt. And if we refuse, he asked, though he already feared the answer. Her eyes dropped, her voice barely above a whisper. Then the world drowns, the floods never end, and all who remain will starve or be hunted. Silence filled the chamber, broken only by the pulsing hum of the core. Daniel felt the weight of choice pressing down on him, heavier than any stone. He was just a man, a wanderer. He had no duty to this alien temple. But then his gaze fell on Lyra, fragile yet brave, her small body still bruised from the flood. She looked at him with trust, with hope, with the belief that he was more than he thought he was. And in that moment, he knew the truth. His choice was no longer just about him. "What do we do?" he asked finally, his voice firm. Lyra stepped closer to the glowing core, her hands trembling as she reached out. "You must take my hand," she said softly. "Why? Together we give ourselves to it, our lives, our bond." Her glowing eyes lifted to his. "It will take all we are and remake the land." Daniel's chest tightened, fear clashing with determination. He thought of the hunters, the beasts, the endless hunger. He thought of the fire they had shared, the nights they had survived, the heartbeat against his chest, and he realized he could not walk away, not from her, not from this. He stepped forward, the hum of the core vibrating through his bones. He reached for her hand, his fingers brushing her trembling ones, their eyes locked, and in that silence, words were not needed. Together, they placed their joined hands against the glowing sphere. The chamber shook violently, the air exploding with light. Daniel's breath caught in his throat as energy surged through him. He felt Lyra's hand tighten in his, her small body shaking beside him. But instead of pain, there was warmth, a flood of memory, of emotion, of life itself. He saw visions, cities before the flood, alien priests standing in prayer, humans and aliens together in peace. He felt Lyra's memories too, her loneliness, her exile, her fear of being nothing, and he knew she felt his wandering, his hunger, his hopeless nights under empty skies. The core bound them together, weaving two souls into one story. The sphere glowed brighter, brighter still, until the chamber blazed like a second sun. The ground trembled, water above shifted, and the whole world seemed to roar in response. Daniel gasped, holding Lyra close as the power rose higher. The choice had been made, and there was no turning back. The flood could end, or the world could shatter, life could bloom again, or everything could vanish into silence. Daniel closed his eyes, whispering one last promise to her. "Whatever happens, I'm with you." The chamber shook as if the earth itself was waking. The core's light wrapped around Daniel and Lyra, lifting them from the ground. Their joined hands burned with warmth, not fire, but life. It felt as if the flood of the world had poured into their veins. Daniel gasped, his body trembling under the force. Lyra cried out softly, her glowing eyes wide with both fear and wonder. The sphere pulsed faster, each throb like a heartbeat shaking the chamber walls. Stone cracked above them, water rushed through, yet none of it touched them. Visions filled Daniel's mind again, clearer than before. He saw land rising from water, rivers flowing into new paths, forests spreading green across drowned earth. He saw creatures returning to places that had been lost, life beginning again. And through it all, Lyra's voice echoed inside him, steady and strong. "Together we are the key," she whispered, her words not spoken but felt. Daniel tightened his grip on her hand, his jaw firm. Whatever destiny demanded, he would not let go of her. Not now, not ever. The core burst outward with a blinding wave. Light poured through the cracks of the temple, shooting upward like a beacon. Far above, the floodwaters trembled, pulled back by invisible hands. The earth groaned as dry land began to rise, islands pushing out from the drowning sea. The hunters who chased them screamed as the ground shifted. Some fled, others fell into the retreating waters. The beasts of the flood vanished into deep rivers that were forming anew. The storm clouds tore apart, sunlight spilling across a land reborn. In the chamber, Daniel felt his knees buckle. The power of the core drained him, every breath heavier than the last. Lyra swayed too, her small body leaning hard into him, her glowing eyes dimmed, but her lips curved with a fragile smile. "We did it," she whispered faintly, her voice almost lost in the echo. "O of stone," Daniel pulled her against his chest, holding her as tightly as he could. "Yes," he breathed, his heart pounding. "We did." But deep inside he wondered, at what cost? The core's light faded, sinking back into silence. The chamber grew dark, save for a few glowing runes still burning faintly. The sphere itself was gone, dissolved into the air as if its duty was complete. Daniel and Lyra collapsed together onto the cold stone, their bodies weak but alive. For a long moment, there was nothing but their breathing. Shallow, broken, yet steady. Lyra's small hand still clung to his shirt, refusing to let go even in exhaustion. Daniel brushed her damp hair back, his chest tight with emotion. When they finally crawled outside, the world had changed. Where once there was only endless water, now valleys and hills stretched into the horizon. The sun rose over fresh land, golden and alive. Birds circled above, creatures already returning to claim the reborn earth. Daniel lifted Lyra into his arms. Carrying her despite his weariness, she rested her head against him, her voice faint but sure. "You saved me," she whispered, "and the world." Daniel shook his head softly, kissing her hair. "We saved each other." They stood on a cliff of new stone, the air fresh and bright. Behind them, the ruins sank slowly into silence, their purpose fulfilled. Before them lay a future neither had imagined, a future not just of survival, but of belonging. For the first time since the storm began, Daniel felt hope. Not the fragile hope of clinging to life, but the deep hope of starting again. He looked at Lyra, fragile yet fierce, the girl fate had thrown into his arms, and he knew she was no longer just someone he saved. She was destiny itself. The flood had stripped them bare, torn them down to nothing, but destiny had clothed them in something greater, not human alone, not alien alone. But together, and together, they would walk into the new world, hand in hand,